In my time, I sought to make knowledge and ideas accessible to all, to free them from the confines of scarcity and privilege. I can see now that this digital network, this internet, takes the very essence of my dream and magnifies it beyond what I could have ever imagined. The pressing of ink to paper was but a first step in a dance that now spans the globe. No longer bound by the limitations of parchment and physical space, ideas can flow freely from one mind to another, transcending borders and time. I marvel at this intricate web, this symphony of voices all engaged in a ceaseless conversation. It embodies the democratization of knowledge I once envisioned, yet it is not without its challenges and dangers. The ease of spreading both truth and falsehood, the paradox of connection accompanied by isolation, the loss of some tactile joys of the printed word. These are complexities I could not have foreseen. But oh, how the essence of human curiosity and connection thrives within this digital age. It is a living testament to the spirit of innovation and a reminder that our quest for understanding and shared experience is a journey without end.
Hello, and thanks for joining us. I'm Kevin Nealon. Our top story tonight, it appears congratulations are in order. We are monitoring things closely as details continue to come in, but it seems, yes, I have confirmation. We're talking about you, Joseph. Congratulations, you really outdid yourself this time, which probably wasn't that hard. Our team has discovered footage from one of the many celebrations taking place in your honor. Stay away from drugs, kids. Now for some deeper analysis, let's go live via satellite to our special guest commentator, Other Kevin. Other Kevin, what are your thoughts on all this? Speechless, Kevin. Wow. Just wow. Insightful as always. Thank you. Well, I'm now being told that we are out of time and that I should pull this lever. I'm Kevin Nealon. Thanks for watching. Take care, Jimmy. Thanks, Bob.
This is my best kind of shoners. We didn't touch one of them, not even one of them. I'm not sure which one is Paul Rudd and which one is Lane Green.
Final card here is the ultimate outcome.
Today is Take Your Dog to Work Day.
Like Scooby-Doo.
Without further ado, his debut.
Sweet Caroline.
Everybody say hello to Sammy. Is it not good?
I'm just pausing so that you just are at the front of your screen.
I'm so enormously flattered.
Branding is not a bad blind date.
I'm gonna have to take a picture of this.
No, this is agape. This is love.
I really enjoyed this. You did do your homework. You asked great questions.
I'm flattered. Thank you. You just made my day.
Look at you! You are insane!
How did I do that?
You're
How
insane!
did I do that?
You're insane!
Listen, I'm so insane that I went back in time and I was able to actually connect with a, not a living legend, but certainly a legend. I went and I guess I channeled Johannes Gutenberg himself. If he were alive today, what would he say about the internet? What would he say about the actual technique that I used to necromance him? In other words, ChatGPT. So that was ChatGPT assuming the role of the inventor of the printing press, Johannes Gutenberg, commenting on digital, on the internet. But listen, we don't have to guess. We can actually ask an expert. We can ask from JJ to JJ, Jeff Jarvis himself, whether that was even remotely accurate. And if Gutenberg were alive today, what would he say? How would he react to the internet, to AI, to Chat GPT? Where are we on this continuum, on this evolution, if you will? Shout out to Michael LeBlanc. Said, very creative idea, Joseph. Michael, the best is yet to come. We are only constrained by our imagination, and our imagination is very, very powerful indeed, especially when the idea has the ability to soar freely, to be able to, I mean, this is communication at the end of the day. The ability for an idea whose time has come, to quote Mr. Victor Hugo, one of my favorite quotes of all time. Now, if you like me dribbling on, you can subscribe to me or subscribe to my channel. Subscribing to me sounds a little painful. I don't need anyone to actually put pen to my ink or my paper, ink to my skin, although that is, quite popular in other circles. But bit.ly/subscribe to the show, where you can make sure that you do not miss any of the 500 episodes in the past, or the 5,000, 50,000 episodes that are yet to happen, but none as more poignant and more powerful and more important than my best guest ever, Mr. Jeff Jarvis. And yes, I do say that to all my guests, but I mean it this time as it relates to Jeff. Every morning, I am hanging out in the Collective Cafe in discord.gg/Alpha Collective and in Clubhouse. When I asked Jeff what his Clubhouse name was, I think his response was, I remember that well. Here today, gone tomorrow. I think Clubhouse is still around, but what's so amazing is how people are creating content. Jeff and myself and Steve Rebell, we really are OGs. We really were around at the dawn of blogging. Buzz Machine, Micro Persuasion, Jaffe Juice. How much has changed? And in fact, how much hasn't changed? How much is exactly the same? We will reminisce. And I've been having such fun in the Collective Cafe every Monday through Friday, 8 to 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. If you want to start your day off on the right foot, on the front foot, if you want to manifest on Monday, if you want Thought Leadership Tuesday, Wellness Wednesday, live book reads on Thursday. We just finished William Danforth's book, I Dare You, which was written in 1931. This is a game-changing book as far as I'm concerned. Just come into discord.gg/Alpha Collective, and we would love to have you. In fact, today we just did an entire show on my magnificent obsession, which really was the fitting homage and the fitting ending to Danforth's book, I Dare You. And if you don't want to come and hang out with us live, Monday through Friday, 8 to 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, you can subscribe to the pod, bit.ly/Collective Cafe to go. So that's just a little bit about some of the content that I'm creating, but no more poignant than the content right now, the daily show for business, and today's seated soliloquy, which very much is connected, as it should be, to my guest, is called Early Days. I have been spending a lot of time thinking about Web 3. And before that, Web 2, and before that, Web 1, and before that, Web 0, and before that, I don't know, Web -1. But it's always interesting to me these days, I guess I call it Groundhog Day in the metaverse, where we are in a lifespan or a life cycle. And what's so great today, and when Jeff comes on shortly, is we'll talk about where we are right now. Look, I got to go back to Web 3. We were asking the whole time, we're still asking, where are we? Are we top of the first? Are we middle of the second? Are we bottom of the third? I've heard such amazing analogies. Look, we're about to start playing the game, and yet the stadium isn't even built. And then I heard another one, which I really loved, which is, it feels like we're late to a party that hasn't started already. The FOMO, the anxiety, the ability to determine, have we missed the boat? When the reality is, that we are all pioneers and we all have the ability to shape and create and turn this into something so magnificent, so incredible, so game-changing, if and only if we focus maybe on the original vision and mission, the idea of democratizing information, knowledge, leveling the playing field, being able to make sure that ideas can truly be free and soar, and also allow people with ideas the opportunity to be able to tell stories the way it should be told. So today we go back to the future, or we go back to the past. We go back to the origins, the Gutenberg Press, the Gutenberg Bible, the Gutenberg Parenthesis. And who better to tell the story than Jeff Jarvis? I've personally had to just become a lot more comfortable in dealing with anxiety, the anxiety of FOMO, the anxiety of being able to go back to that insult that was given to me a few years ago. There are two types of people, pioneers and settlers. The pioneers get shot and the settlers take the land. You, my boy, as the advice that was given, you're a pioneer. And I said, thanks very much and thank you for nothing. You know, I wouldn't have it any other way. I'm a pioneer, you're a pioneer, we're all pioneers. As long as there is something still to create, as long as there's still that blue ocean, that blank canvas, it's well worth being able to join hands, join forces, join arms with fellow pioneers. And as Drucker once said, it is far riskier to defend the past than it is to create the future. So now let's talk about the past, the present, and the future, and welcome Jeff Jarvis, author of the Gutenberg Parenthesis. He's a professor at CUNY's Craig Newmark Graduate School of Journalism. I feel like the Graduate School of Journalism should be called the Jeff Jarvis Graduate School of Journalism. But hey, that's just my opinion. He was founder of Entertainment Weekly, a critic for TV Guide and People, president of Advance.net, the online arm of Advance Publications, including Condé Nast, a journalist for the New York Daily News, San Francisco Examiner, and Chicago Tribune. He is co-host of the podcast This Week in Google on the Twit network. He is no twit. He's also, by the way, if memory serves, been on the Howard Stern show, which to me makes him the ultimate in my eyes. Jeff Jarvis, welcome finally to the show.
Finally, great to see you, my friend. It has been too long.
Should we just start off talking about Howard Stern?
Sure. I'm a fan of Howard Stern from some time. I was not a Stern fan. I didn't know. I was TV critic at I think it was TV Guide. I decided to write about his then CBS show, and so I had to listen to his show. And I thought what everybody else thought about Howard Stern until I listened to it and understood what he was. And my line in the review was that he's more than the sum of his farts. And Howard is a brilliant interviewer, and the office dynamics are a great soap opera, and I think he's a brilliant media personality.
Isn't he, Joe? By the way, you know, when you have an entire production staff that I have of 700 people, they get in each other's way. But if they had been a little bit quicker on the draw, they would have given you the proper rim shot that you deserved. I love it.
You need Fred. Everybody has to have their Fred.
Everyone needs a Fred. Well, I have 12 voices in my head at any given point in time, so that works. And you know. And I'll dwell on him just for 1 second longer, or maybe 30 seconds longer. It's like watching The Walking Dead and realizing that in actual fact, you're not watching a zombie show. It's like and for me, the evolution of Howard Stern, I don't even want to call it the maturation. I'll just call it the evolution. But throughout every step of the way, he's been a master storyteller and maybe one of the greatest journalists and interviewers of all time.
I really think he is. He has a way to listen to people that I think is unparalleled. And media are not so good at listening. One of the programs I got to start at the journalism school is called engagement journalism, and the whole precept of it is that we're not good at listening. in journalism. And Howard Stern, I think, is a model for how to hear what people are really saying, be empathetic to them, understand them, bring them out, and make them say things they didn't want to say, too, conveniently.
I mean, it brings me back to Barbara Walters. I promised I wasn't going to cry. I promise you, you will not cry today. You may cry thinking how long the interview's been going on for, but blame Howard Stern, because I actually tried to build this whole brand on certain muses. One was Howard Stern, long form interviewing, not being subject to the idea of ad breaks. I listened a lot to Tim Ferriss. I was really paying attention to what I believe are some of the better content creators. And of course, Jon Stewart was at the top of that list, hence the positioning of the Daily Show for business. And I'm still learning all the time.
Aren't we all?
We are, but before we learn a little bit more, I promised you there would be ridiculous in addition to sublime. And so what we did, again, with our shoestring budget, is we sent our private investigators into the field to find out some dirt on Jeff Jarvis. I mean, when you talk about Entertainment Weekly and People and TV Guide, surely there's a little bit of TMZ somewhere. And so this is what we found out about you, Jeff. The first thing we found out is that you are afraid of bridges. Even in Midjourney, in the AI world, bridges are still scaring you. Why bridges?
I'm getting palm sweat right now. I'm not 100% sure, but I'll say this: the Bay Bridge in San Francisco collapsed, and I'm very sane not to go on it.
All right, we will keep you only close to virtual bridges. But here's something else that we found out about you: is you used to rack up 300,000 miles a year on United, and now you have no travel FOMO. And guess what? Nor do I. In fact, this is going to be the first year since 2006 that I'm not flying 100,000 miles with American.
Wow. Yeah, I thought that I might miss. Well, what I actually do miss, Joseph, is my vaunted global services status.
People
I could
love
kick
that, don't
old
they?
ladies out of the jetway because I was so important to get on first. I had my special phone number to call. It was quite wonderful. I had to take trips recently, one to Edinburgh and London to St. Andrews, and one to San Francisco. And so it was the first time I'd done that, apart from rescuing my father from Florida in the midst of the pandemic. And it's like I built an expertise in how to travel and how to do all these stupid little things, and it's now a waste, and that's fine. I don't miss it at all. I thought I would. I don't. Do you?
I miss this will come out wrong, but I miss the warm nuts on American Airlines. No, I don't. The thing is so interesting. It became almost like respite. It became like a spa in the fast-paced world that I lived in. Sometimes it would be great when you were up in the air, and I guess what I've learned now over the last 3 years is you can find meaning and solace and peace without having to drive an hour and a half to JFK, go through TSA. And also you can go to Stop and Shop, buy nuts and warm them up. And that's just as good. So
you're in your own little cockpit right now.
Exactly. So Jeff, if we took this and we just extended it slightly, priorities, you've seen so many interesting cycles of business. You've seen so many cycles of life. Here we are 3.5 years later, 2023. Have our priorities in fact changed societally, culturally, or are people now returning back to their old ways? We're seeing all this new talk about demanding people come back into the office. And my challenge to them is, bless you, Gesundheit.
Sorry.
I mean, Gutenberg Gesundheit.
Yeah.
But, my feeling is if you want me to come back into the office, why don't you make office a better place for me to be?
Well, yeah, and why be there? I mean, I think that so I just finished writing the next book, and we'll see what the editors think of it, about the internet. And part of that is gratitude for the internet, and to think what would life in the last 3 years have been without the internet. And we were able to keep going with jobs and work and family and friendships and all kinds of things and school. But it also finally started to readjust the mythical work-life balance. And people discovered that, and I'm among them. I mean, even though I was a professor, I'm a professor. I was a schmuck and an idiot, and I went into the office every day because I'm also a gossip, and I wanted to see what was going on, and I didn't want to be out of things. Uh, so now I don't, and life is so much better. Commuting sucks. I live way out in New Jersey, so it could be as long as an hour and 45 minutes to get in each way. You had to wear pants. You had to go in and deal with people. I'm much happier and much more productive sitting here at my laptop out here in the burbs. And I think that's true of a lot of people. But companies and bosses obviously aren't liking this very much, and they're trying to get people back. The other thing that I do somewhat dread is what happens to the office marketplace. I was just, as I say, in London, and I found it pretty healthy feeling. But if you go to Midtown Manhattan, because it's all offices there and there's really no residential, it's drying up. San Francisco is in a doom loop, as they say. I don't know what happens to some of these cities that were designed, as it turns out, badly for this present age.
Well, one thing that hopefully we never miss is TV Guide and bad photoshopping as well. So the last little fun fact, and actually it's not even a fun fact. It's coming to life. I'm going to let you do a bit of a show and tell if you like. But you were TV critic of TV Guide and People, and you founded Entertainment Weekly. I mean, look back now at the world of magazines and what is and where are we? Where are we right now in terms of the future of subscription-based print? Because we're going to get very soon into your new book. It seems like right now that we're looking at relics, that we're looking at the end of the end. Is that true? Is that exactly where we are right now?
Yeah, I think so. I wrote a little book about the magazine, which will be out later this year. And it turned into an elegy to the form, which I didn't necessarily expect. But as I did my research, not to get ahead of ourselves, but the Gutenberg parenthesis is the idea that there is a beginning and end to an age and an exception in history. And so the Gutenberg parenthesis believes the theory from three academics in the University of Southern Denmark say that the age of print was kind of an exception in history. We can find other parentheses. There's a parenthesis, I think, around mass media. Mass media started with the mechanization of print, with steam-powered presses and the linotype and paper made from pulp very inexpensively, and so on. And then it became broadcast and so on. I think we're coming to the end of the era of mass media, which I celebrate because the idea of the mass is fundamentally an insult to the people you don't want to hear from. But I also then looked at the magazine and it's an era that in the English-speaking world, we'd start with Tatler and Spectator out of the coffee houses of London, where Habermas said the public sphere began, though I will argue with that. And each period of the magazine had a role. And interestingly, I think that in those coffee houses, there indeed was a public conversation that the magazines fed from. And it was part of, this much Habermas is right about, it was part of a public discourse that took on a new flavor and that mattered. Ben Franklin tried to start a magazine and failed at it. Webster started a magazine that didn't last long in the US. There was something about the magazine that really appealed to people. And they were very conversational. Webster was begging people to write for his magazine. The Spectator put a box in a lion's head in the coffee houses so you could drop things into them so they would appear in the next edition of the magazine and be part of the conversation. It was highly conversational. But then again, as print became scaled, mechanized, industrialized, and huge, it lost that conversational nature, and magazines took on different forms. When Harper's started in 1850, the idea was that it would curate the best of a sudden explosion of content because suddenly content was cheaper to print. And then, of course, as time went on, it it hired their own writers and wanted their own voice and so on. Then you move into the 1920s and you see Loose starting Time magazine and turning the magazine into a corporate entity that yielded eventually My Magazine, Entertainment Weekly, also People and Fortune and so on. And so we end up now with a magazine, and I think it's a real shame, Joseph, because I think that the magazines could have been the survivor, the success story of the internet, but they weren't. They could have been because they were built around community. They were built around shared interest and need and passion. They could have enabled that kind of community to grow online and to see past their pages, but they couldn't do that because they thought they made a product called content. They thought they needed to control it and say what it was first page to last. And that what was valuable there was their content and the leadership of the magazine editor. No, what's valuable is the community of interest around it. And so much on the internet has brought out that community in all kinds of wonderful ways, but magazines were left behind. And so My Magazine, Entertainment Weekly, is no longer in print. And frankly, that's a good decision. Try to find a magazine newsstand, even in Manhattan. Try to buy magazines these days. They're ridiculously expensive, the few of them that are out there. All of Time Inc. Time Inc. jettisoned off Time and Fortune and Sports Illustrated, and the rest of it ended up at Meredith, and then Meredith ended up at Dot Dash, and that's just now a content factory turning out more stuff online all the time. That's not the spirit of the magazine. So yes, I think we're at the end too of a magazine parenthesis.
I mean, don't even get me started on a name like Dot Dash, but it's more like dot. Well, no, what is SOS? Dot dash dash
right.
dot. In my mind, as you're talking, I have three words: marketers ruin everything. And maybe that's unfair as pets.com sits over my shoulder. But I'm thinking, you mentioned the C word, which is content. And then there's another C word, which is, call it commercials or commercialization. The business model, the flawed or maybe not flawed business model of magazines, that content itself is subsidized by advertising. The church and state lines that should never be crossed. And no one ever even questioned why that was, and if that was, or if there was a better way. And I remember talking about magazines, forget about I want my MTV, I wanted my industry standard. I remember the industry standard was so thick at one point that you could actually you could herniate a disc if you kind of picked it up without having done your bicep curls. And we all watched it just anemically disappear. As Mike Tyson would say, it faded into Bolivian. I would love to hear your thoughts, because here we are today with this, in this new world of Substack and Twitter subscriptions. So let me give you two parts to this. One is without indicating that marketers do ruin everything. What was what role did the whole advertising and the subsidized content business model play versus maybe what it could have played with respect to the idea of subscriptions, especially with community playing an active role in thriving and reviving magazines? I know there was a long setup, but I wanted to kind of get to, as I was thinking in my mind, in terms of kind of recognizing now where we might be heading.
I think, Joseph, you hit on two concepts there, and one is content and one is attention, i.e. advertising. So this idea of content, part of what I saw in looking at the Gutenberg parenthesis is that it was with print that we started to look at things contained as content, that you had a book with a beginning and an end, and everything was in the middle, and it was a story, and that things could be contained, and we could explain the world in the space of an article or a story or a book. And that idea of content and that the value lay in content, and that we created copyright to establish that value, and that it became a property, and it became an artifact rather than an act of creativity. I think that's critical to this period of Gutenberg. Now, what happened? I'll mark the time that you're talking about to the 1890s, when Frank Munsey started Munsey's magazine. And magazines were running more expensively. They cost 25, 50 cents each. And then Munsey came up with the idea of selling the magazine at a dime to get scale. And he succeeded, going around the distributors at first, but finally bringing them along. And he sold the magazine at a loss. So there was the beginning of the business model of the attention economy. There was the moment when you lost money on your content. You made money by selling your audience's attention to the advertisers. And God bless it for a long time, right? It supported a lot of content and artistry and information and journalism. I think we're going to have to try to figure out how to keep advertising as a subsidy for creation in this country and in this marketplace. But it was also corrupting. It was better when it was a scarcity. And if you were Henry Luce and you controlled the printing press and what went on it, and you controlled the value and you had pricing power, then hallelujah for you. Same with a newspaper, same with any publication, same with television. But in this age of abundance, where content is now completely commodified, content as content doesn't really have much value, because we can all make it. Our conversation is content. AI will be churning out lots of content and lots of crap. And there's nothing special anymore about content. There's nothing special about even being a writer, for that matter. The specialness resides elsewhere. It resides in things like trust and authority and community. Now, does that say that everything should be behind the paywall and a subscription? Well, no, I hope not, because there's only so much money people are going to want to spend. Witness what's happening in the streaming wars right now. And they're all trying to raise their price, and we're going to find that they're going to start losing audience. So they lost audience in linear television. They're going to lose audience in streaming, because there's only so much tolerance for paying for stuff. It has only so much value in the marketplace. And I think we're still going to need content, creation, journalism that is subsidized by advertising and marketing. But advertising and marketing as it stands today sucks, right? It goes from the days of Moore Park sausages, Mom. You're probably too young for that. But there were, or lived elsewhere in the world. But there's crappy things that still stick in my head from.
Yeah, I'm an old South African.
Yeah, so you didn't have that. But I think that, and then we get to programmatic, and programmatic advertising completely commodifies the audience, commodifies any value of environment. Environment doesn't matter. All that matters is the data about the person's proclivities. And so, and the advertising that follows you around all the time and irritates people more. I think advertising has to change. The problem is, and I'm curious to hear what you say about this, Joseph, I think that too slowly, for my taste, we do see in journalism and media efforts to innovate and change and develop. I don't think there's nearly enough, but at least there's some activity. Not so much in advertising. I think advertising, because nobody wants to argue with the guy with the checkbook. I don't think advertising has been forced to rethink itself fundamentally around relationships. Now, I'll say that on one side of my mouth. On the other side of my mouth, I went to a dinner that Weber Shandwick had before we all locked down with a bunch of marketers. And after enough good Cabernet was served, I got honest answers to some questions. Like, do you care about the fate of newspapers? They said, nah, not really. The only thing that matters to us is our share price, and the Wall Street Journal is what that's about. Otherwise, we build our own relationships directly now, for good and bad. If you're getting yelled at on Twitter, or if you're building a relationship otherwise, the opportunity of the internet is to go around the middlemen of media and to build those relationships directly. And so I fear we might lose advertising net because of that, as a subsidy to the media that we care about. And if free media goes away and things go behind paywalls, then what's going to be left out in the free world is disinformation and crap. And that's not great for culture or for AI.
Well, I mean, you heard what AI Gutenberg had to say as per ChatGPT, embracing the internet. I did another version of it, which is what would Gutenberg say if he were alive today about AI and ChatGPT. And I was amazed, maybe not surprised, because the bots will tell us anything. Of course, we're not going to replace you, Joe. But essentially, there is this wonder and this amazement and this joy and this ability to see the high road, but also being sober and aware of what the low road might look like. Being fully aware of of disinformation, disintermediation, etc. I will tell you that it's interesting because I started my Substack about 2 or 3 weeks ago. I have no idea why it had taken me so long. And something kind of strange and beautiful happened this morning. I decided I wasn't going to charge anyone. Why would I charge anyone? I just go and experiment and see what happened. And someone reached out to me today and pledged $8 and said, you've given me so much value over the years, and you've proven your consistency and certainly the quality of your work. I want to pay $8 a month for your content. I didn't even have a premium option. And suddenly I looked at it and I was thinking, you know what? I think the 4 Ps, everything is everything is commoditized. Everything, from airlines to car rentals to everything is commoditized. But you know what isn't commoditized is relationships and humanity and service and experience and community. Now, maybe I'm being a little naive and a little bit too romantic about it, but I'd say genuinely and generally, show me one product that is actually not commoditized for the most part. For the most part, what is the difference here is going to be that human connection, that human touch. And I think maybe just even in this little microcosm of Substack, what I'm seeing is a little bit of hope, just a little bit of hope that actually says, the work you've done and the work you've put in may just make a difference, especially when we're not sure what to believe and who to believe and what to trust and who to trust anymore. Am I being naive here?
No, I certainly hope not, because that's why I started engagement journalism as a all-around community. The interesting thing about Gutenberg is, among many things, is that if you or I invented the printing press, or anybody of our contemporaries invented the printing press, what's the first thing we would print? Our names, right? It would be an outlet for ego. As far as we can tell, Gutenberg never printed his name, didn't tell the story. We don't know much. We have to piece together the story out of old legal fights and out of how there's a forensic analysis of how he made his Bible and his other publications. And so it's a fascinating detective story. So this idea that ego came to be marked by media, I think probably didn't come until Montaigne in the essay and other things. So the essence of media in that sense changed. The other thing that changed, once again, and I rail on this, because the book I was originally going to write was about the death of the mass. And I found this more interesting, and there's a chapter in the book about that. But I think it's a through line through much of the work that I do, the magazines, this, and other things as well, is that, again, the mass, to view humanity as a mass is to ignore people, is to not want to know them as individuals and members of communities, is to not have a relationship with them, is to dismiss them. And so I think what happens now is that we have the opportunity to rescale back to a human level, back to a level where communities are possible. Now, there's a paradox here, right? The internet is bigger than anything ever has been, but it had to be big in the law of networks so that it could be small. It had to enable everybody so you could find anybody, so you could find your community. And as I desert Twitter, I'm still there, but as I look elsewhere and I'm on Mastodon or I'm on Blue Sky, it didn't take long at all to find the critical mass of enough people for me to have good conversations with people I cared about. And the truth is, Twitter was never big. You never talked to the whole world on Twitter. You talked to a small subset, but we acted like it was big. Same with Facebook. When I interviewed Zuckerberg years ago, He said, no two people on earth ever see the same Facebook. You're seeing a small subset. So we have to rescale our brain, our media brains, our mass media brains, back to the idea of being smaller. Here's, as you start your Substack, by the way, I noticed you have a bridge on there. You didn't give me a trigger warning, a burning bridge at that. As you start
Well, I
your
did
Substack,
say, when is it okay to burn a bridge? And the answer is never.
never, right. So fascinating little factoid that I didn't realize was that before the mechanization, industrialization, and mass media, the average circulation of a daily newspaper in the United States was 4,000. It was a good Substack newsletter. If you got $20 a month out of every subscriber at 4,000, you'd have a living. You'd be fine, right? That's big enough. I think we have to redefine and rescale our ideas of big enough. And that enables, back to your primary point, that's what enables community. Because you're not thinking you have to broadcast to the whole world, that you have to have a blockbuster, that you have to be huge. No, you can be big enough.
I have some very bad news for you, Mr. Jeff Jarvis, because not only do you have your next book coming out and then your next book coming out, but I'm now telling you what your next book is going to be called after that. It's going to be called Rescale. You've said it a number of times. It lands like beautifully, and there's no one better to tell the story than you.
Well,
so it's like as in a memo, right? Rescale, but also, like I have my Nespresso machine, and there's also something called descaling. Sometimes you have to descale, but also rescale.
Joe, if you think about it too, I wrote What Would Google Do years ago, and I talked to, I'm sure you've talked to him a number of times, Rashad Tabakwala.
I was just about to, I swear to you, I was just about to say Rashad. In fact, if you go back and you look, I was in the, but carry on.
So Rashad, the most quotable man in media, besides you, as I talked about Google with him, what he said that really fascinated me, and I think he was very right, as he usually is that because big advertisers didn't understand the internet, didn't understand Google, Google had to go after a different population of advertisers. And it was the little people. I want to sell my strawberry jam around the world, who never could afford a newspaper or a magazine or any other media. And Google, because it's so big, made small possible, right? Google allowed that little tiny advertiser to sell their strawberry jam in a very targeted and efficient way, sharing the risk with that advertiser anywhere. And that, as Rashad said, that changed all the rules of advertising. Then the big guys did come in, but they had to operate under these new rules.
He actually, the point I was going to make is Rashad coined a phrase back in the day called re-aggregation. And he actually said it is possible to get to that scale as a mass marketer, as from a, you got to hit those quarterly, your quarterly earnings, you got to hit your quotas. You can get the numbers, but you have to start from the ground up. You have to actually start from the and bring together these cohesive, these homogeneous communities, and almost like Mercury, the globs come together, as opposed to the one size fits all, the shotgun approach, the spray and pray, the Super Bowl approach of cascading all the way down, trickle down marketing, if you will, trickle down advertising.
Or another way to look at it is that it's emergent and bottom up. Right. And what do we see with this whole notion of the influencer, which, by the way, I think is BS. I was called an influencer in the day because of Dell Hell, when I caused hell for Dell. And I wasn't an influencer at all. Just their computers at the time sucked. And when I said so, people said, yeah, what he says, with their pitchforks behind me. And by the way, why aren't our influencers professors and experts and doctors? But anyway, I'll put that aside. Our influencers are teenagers on TikTok. And I don't denigrate that. I think it's wonderful that they have their voice and they can create their own culture, and they can do this, but it's emergent. It's bottom up. And in What Would Google Do, I talked about replacing the mass with the massive niches. And I think that's what we're seeing happen, is that, yes, Rashad's right. You can aggregate up something. I tell this to newspapers. Start learning how to serve one community. That skill scales, and you can serve many communities then as a result, because you now know how to, and you can get big again.
I mean, I'm smiling at, we've got Dell Hell and Delta Skelter. We've got two of the, certainly I was a blip compared to Dell. I mean, Dell Hell was the inspiration. But I remember Delta Skelter had had a lot of legs back in the day as well. Now I'm thinking, I'm going back to this point about humble Gutenberg, and I suppose I think what you're trying to tell me is he didn't call it the Gutenberg Bible; he just called it the Bible. So the Gutenberg name came second. But I'm going to say that you're too humble, and I'm going to suggest that maybe you are the modern day Gutenberg. So I did go back. I did go back to Midjourney, and we got two versions. I like the second one actually. This one, this one to me,
rabbinical.
Yeah, and also you got a bit of an OG Brooklyn beard. I don't know what's going on there.
Yeah. Also, a lot of Botox, I might add, but that's okay.
I mean, I don't think there was Botox back in the day. I did read, which was interesting to me, that Gutenberg was involved in several court cases. It almost sounds like Zuckerberg. Most significant of these is a case against him in 1456, where his former partner sued for what equated to 6% interest in the earnings from the printing press. The trial effectively bankrupted Gutenberg, and he died less than a decade after the end of the trial.
Nope, that's the myth. That's what everyone presumes. His partner was named Johann Fust.
Wait, are you telling me the internet lies?
Yes, it does. Yes, it does, especially if it's ChatGPT. So Johann Fust was his partner and his financier. And the report has always been that Gutenberg died penniless, that Fust took his money. A friend of mine joked, "Would you rather be first or Fust?" And that Fust won.
I was going to say, may the Fust be with you.
There's you. Okay, Papa. Where's your rim shot? There you go. So there's a book in German that analyzes the court documents that we have, and makes very clear that no, they were just dissolving the partnership. Their partnership was to produce the Bible, and they finished, and it was highly profitable, and they made money, and they went their separate ways. And Fust and his son-in-law Peter Schiffer continued their business for more than 100 years in the family, which is quite amazing. You think it was the second printing business ever started. Gutenberg kept a press, did print other things. There's some debate about what he printed, and we're not sure exactly. There's a lot of scholarly study of the artifacts that he left, and but some fascinating work. Paul Needham at Princeton has done a lot of work on this, and so we don't know what motivated Gutenberg, what he expected to do, right? It's important that he was a man of the scribal age, not of his own age. His own age didn't start for 50 years after the Bible. That's when the book started taking on the form that we know now, with things like titles and title pages and page numbers and paragraph indentations. All of these things came later. What Gutenberg tried to do was to mimic the scribe's work. The fonts that he created were mimicked after scribal handwriting. He wanted to perfect and scale that work. And it was only later that people started inventing with it. It took 150 years. This is my favorite fact from all of the work that I did. And it's an obvious point, but it didn't hit me until I researched it. It took 150 years to around 1600, a few years either side of that, before we saw an incredible rush of innovation with print. By then, the technology was boring. The technology had fallen to the past in a way. And now you saw the creation of the modern novel with Cervantes, the creation of the essay with Montaigne, the creation of a market for printed plays with Shakespeare, and the creation of the newspaper. That rush of innovation came a century and a half later. And I think that right now, where we are, is we're still in the phase of seeing the future in the analog of the past. Magazines and newspapers still look recognizable online. They haven't fundamentally rethought what they are and what they do and why they exist. They're trying to bring media into online. In fact, they think online is a medium. I think it's not. I think that media are a subset of the internet. And it is because of this rationale, the quick timeline is 1454, Bible comes off press about then. 1500, the end of the incunabular, the infant age of print, the developments I mentioned, like titles and title pages. 1600, the developments that I then mentioned, novel, essay, newspaper. 1710, we get copyright. We get a business model for print. and the idea that print is a product and property. 1800s is the first time we get innovation with the technology of print. The technology of print basically didn't change. I'm holding in my hand a letter. This is the letter. What is that? T. This little tiny letter, right? That's it. If you think about it, for more than 400 years, every single word that was ever printed in any language was set one letter at a time, laboriously put in one letter at a time, justified line upon line upon line, then cleaned and put back because you couldn't afford to have too many letters, put it back. Then if you had a bestseller, you had to take it back again and reset it line at a time until this device, the matrix in the linotype, replaced that by molding lines of type at a time. I'll get off my geek fit there. So 1800s, huge technology innovation. 1900s, we get radio and broadcast, the first competitor for print in the 1920s. 1950s, TV, then we're today. We're only about a quarter century past the introduction of the commercial browser, 1994. And that's when I mark the beginning of the popular internet. This is to say, finally to the point, that I believe we're at the year 1480 in Gutenberg years, which is to say that it's early. We don't really know what the internet is yet. We're still looking at it in our knowledge of the past. I can't shed that knowledge. Maybe my students are too old to do that, but I hope they do shed that knowledge and they start to imagine what the internet can be. That doesn't mean we leave print behind. It doesn't mean that we leave the lessons of the age of print behind. We may leave printed newspapers and printed magazines behind, but there'll still be books. There'll still be these artifacts, and they still live to teach us lessons. But the tremendous innovation, I don't think has begun even yet.
It's so exciting, and yet it's frustrating too when we think about how the players, the dash dots and dash dats, and are all either in search of the next big thing or the next bright and shiny object, or just looking at shareholder price. And then I think back to, talking about OG status, Buzz Machine, the blog, the lowly blog that has been forgotten and downtrodden, and there you can count probably on one hand how many people. It's probably you and Seth and Godin and a few others. Maybe it's a little bit, I think it's not as dire as that. What this tells me is that we've done ourselves a major disservice by just jumping on to the next big. And the reality, Jeff, is I don't know what there is anymore. I mean, I wrote a book called Zero, where the O stands for owned assets. And I think to myself, what assets do I own as a content creator, as a publisher, etc.? There aren't many left. My blog, Jaffe Juice, with all the cobwebs sitting on that blog right now, I actually owned it. I mean, I owned it as much as I owned it, within TypePad or whatever the case may be. Is the message here that we need to slow down and calm down and avoid throwing the baby out with the bathwater?
I think calm down, yes. I get very upset about the moral panic that media have around the internet, because media look at the internet as competition and they want to kind of shiv it. And I think that we were smart enough to figure out print. We had a 30 years war, but we were smart enough to figure out print. We'll be smart enough to figure out the internet. So calm down, yes. Slow down, I don't think we necessarily have a choice to. I think the speed will be what it is. And importantly, it's not deterministic. I'm not a technological determinist. I don't believe that the technology prescribes one path. The point of all of this is that we have choices. We should make those choices in an educated manner with context and the knowledge of the complexity. This is why I wrote the Gutenberg Parenthesis, because I thought there were lessons to be learned from our entry into the age of print as we leave it and enter whatever this next age is going to be. And so I do think it's critical that we need to look back and understand what came before and be thoughtful about it. Now, having said all that about the internet and social media and search and so on, I think we can figure this out. AI is another interesting case, because I don't think that it's necessarily as earth-shattering as some would say. And I do fear that some of the AI is in the hands of people who are spouting some really nutty philosophies, in my view. I think long-termism is a difficult worldview that folks like Peter Thiel and Sam Altman and Sam Bankman-Fried and others hold. And so what concerns me there is not the technology, it's not the machine, it's not the speed, it's actually the boys who are in charge of it and what they're saying and thinking and how they're trying to justify their decisions. Here's this is not in the, well, it's implicit in the Gutenberg parenthesis, is, Joe, I think that the key right now is to get back to human scale, as I said before, which means get back to humanity. And in the next book about the internet that I'm working on now, one chapter, one heading within a chapter is to demote the geeks. I think if you go back and look at the early days of print, the technologist had to be in charge. Gutenberg and Schiffer and Fust had to decide how they printed, what they printed, how they sold, what they sold, and so on. They'd made every decision. But soon enough, the technologist fades in the background. The technology gets boring. As Clay Shirky said years ago, something to the effect that technology gets interesting when it gets boring, because what happens with it? Again, Cervantes and Montaigne and the newspaper. And so I think we're at the stage of the internet where we need to start pushing the technology and the technologists to the back and bringing humanity to the forward. And that means humanities scholars to the forward and thinking about this in terms of community studies and anthropology and sociology and ethics and history and other fields. Why should the geeks be in charge of everything? AI is a little more difficult. It's a very complex technology, but even there, I often quote and tweet Margaret Mitchell and Emily Bender and Timnit Gebru, who were three of the four authors of the Stochastic Parrots paper about AI. And all this talk about existential risk and AI is going to destroy humanity is all complete bull. It's a way to chest thump of look how powerful we boys are. But there are really human consequences we need to talk about now. You remember the case of the schmuck lawyer who used ChatGPT to find case citations for a case?
Yeah.
I went to federal court in person to watch the hearing that he had to undergo as a result. And it was fascinating. And poor attorney Schwartz Esquire, right, believed the machine couldn't lie. And that's not really his fault. That was the fault of ChatGPT and OpenAI and later Microsoft to say, oh, this is just like search. It's going to give you stuff, right? But then what's fascinating is he was out of the field. He got citations. He submitted it through a colleague. Then the opposing counsel said, we can't find these things. And the judge said, produce these cases. And he doubled down. He went back to ChatGPT and he said, is this real? If he had to ask, maybe he should have realized it wasn't. But ChatGPT, of course, said, as you said, tells us what we want to say, yes. And then it produced the cases for him. And the cases were, in the judge's word, gibberish. And one of the lawyer's lawyer, if your lawyer hires lawyer, you know you're in trouble. The lawyer's lawyer said, thank you, Your Honor, for exposing the danger and the risk of ChatGPT. And the judge said, I didn't set out to do any such thing. And he talked about how they used the word mistake a lot. And he granted that the first going to ChatGPT in the first place was a mistake. But he said everything that occurred next on had nothing to do with machines. It was the lawyer's mistake. He didn't do his job. He didn't have the respect for his client to have the due diligence to look stuff up and verify things and listen to the opposing counsel and listen to the judge. He believed the technology. It is time that we push the technology in our mindset, in our priorities down and not put it up on a pedestal, not think that it's so damn smart it could destroy mankind. It's just a tool. It's a tool of humanity. Especially large language models reflect our biases and reflect our frailties of the people who had the power to publish although these many years and make the internet. We've got to look at it in human terms.
You get the air horn almost. It's like the four chair turn on the voice. If you don't get an air horn, then you know you did something. There are two things that indicate that you were one of my best guests yet and ever.
But you say that to all the guests. I know, Joe.
Well, one is the air horn which you got, and the other one is coming in a few moments. I wanted to. I found. I don't know if you know of someone by the name of Josh Rosenthal. He was on a podcast, actually on Michael Stelzner's podcast a couple of years ago, and I became enamored with this. With he's a historian, and he spoke about in context of what the Ledger and Gutenberg Printing Press did with respect to leading to the Renaissance, but also in terms of decentralization, fundraising, knowledge. And we talk about back at the time. He said something which I thought was amazing. I'll just read it to you. He said, when people think of the Gutenberg Printing Press, they often think about the first Bible that was printed. But in actuality, most people during medieval times were illiterate. They weren't able to read books. And because of this, the Gutenberg Printing Press wasn't in business to print books. But here's what he said. He said, if venture capitalists and investors were looking at the Gutenberg Printing Press, they would have shut it down as a failed idea because most of the population couldn't read. But what the population could do, and what the Gutenberg Printing Press took advantage of, was deciphering illustrations and pictures, the medieval meme. And these memes spread like wildfire. Tens of thousands were being printed and shared across medieval Europe. He continues, but what I loved is how he was citing what was happening then, coupled with the actual advent of the ledger and what that actually did in terms of the dissemination of markets, payment, dissemination of information, democratizing knowledge, and how both of those were a precursor to the Renaissance. It makes me think about Web3 now. It makes me think again about where we are in early days, and how maybe the best is yet to come. And message, note to self, we would do well to stay a little bit maybe more patient, maybe not slow down, but calm down and stay the course, and recognize, if we can look back to the past, we can actually use it to help us predict the future.
Yeah, I think that so there was a paper I quote by James Dewar from Rand that he wrote in 1998, the same year that Google came along. And he said, don't slow down. Don't try to stop the technology. Those countries that tried to stop the technology of print were disadvantaged on the whole. He said there will be unintended consequences. And the faster you get to those unintended consequences and deal with them and understand how to deal with them, the better off you're going to be. And again, I think that Gutenberg himself couldn't have seen what he started would turn into. By the way, I haven't given a standing caveat, which is critical, which is that movable type is used in China and Korea before it was used in Mainz, Germany, but we don't know if there's any connection across that. So if we mark the Western story, it starts then. But interestingly, to your point, at the end of that incunabular age, at the turn of the century at 1500, the printing business was in shambles. It was a mess, not just because of literacy. Literacy as a whole was expanding enough, and the client base of the book at the beginning was more institutional, churches and so on. And there was plenty of other printing business to be done that was doing decently well, which is ephemera, bureaucracy, laws, proclamations, song sheets, those kinds of things, which are in great measure lost to history. That matters printing business too. But the book business was a mess because all they made was the ancients, because the humanist scholars thought that we all had to get Aristotle. And once everybody had Aristotle, who was going to buy Aristotle, wasn't much of a business. What saved it? Martin Luther. Because Martin Luther didn't so much tack his theses up to the church door as he printed them on a poor printer's press in Mainz. And that's what made the difference to the business, because then pamphlet after pamphlet after pamphlet, not books, so much as pamphlets came off. But also Luther made a very important decision in that he chose to publish in German. He began to create a public thereby. He wasn't just writing for the academics and the church. And in doing so, he began to standardize German through his translation of the Bible. And in doing that, he brought together a sense of Germanness, a sense of a nation, which wouldn't get formally coalesced for some years later, but still it happened in England as well, where you started to see languages coalesce and the idea of the nation coalesces. Now, is that an institution that is forever? Is it an institution that's going to stay? I don't know. The institutions of copyright and censorship and editing and publishing could all be changed. But if you listen to Dewar and Rand, he would say, try to get there faster, actually, so that you're better at dealing with what comes your way.
I love that. Get there quicker, get there faster. And just like we are only limited by our imagination, we can imagine a future. We can imagine dreams, and we can imagine nightmares. And even in those nightmares, we can navigate if we are able to actually almost create these scenarios and deal, right? Deal with the reality as opposed to deny it, as opposed to push it under the rug. I normally come up with a quote for my guest. I should have maybe quoted Martin Luther, but in actual fact, this was the one that I ended up using, which actually, in this case, I'm going to have to just give Johannes Gutenberg the credit. Give me 26 soldiers of lead, and I will conquer the world. Maybe not the terracotta army, but the power of ink, the power of print, the power of the written word, the power of democratized distribution, the power of Jeff Jarvis. Let me just end it with that.
Thank you, my friend. It's so good to see you.
It was wonderful. And I'll tell you, remember, the hallmark of a great guest on this show is the air horn, and to determine if Chuck Norris actually thought you were worthy. And it turns out that he did.
You are Chuck Norris approved.
And
yay.
And we will be back soon. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you for watching the show about hope, positivity, optimism, and if there's time left over, a little bit of marketing with your host, multiple author, and global keynote speaker, Joseph Jaffe. If you like the show, tell a friend or two. Please subscribe to the show, and if you want to get inside news, previews of upcoming guests, and much more, visit josephjaffe.com/subscribe to sign up for the show's newsletter.
And despite the best ministrations of your wife, you still look ugly.